Hey folks, Trevor from History on the Move here, and in honor of the American Freedom Train coming back to a cosmetic life, I want to share a few of the sources, that are out there for you to get into if you really want to learn more about, say, Ross Rowland or Reading 2101, which is what I'm in, the American Freedom Train, Chesty Steam Special, the Chesty Safety Express, or 614, or anything that's kind of related to that, because if you mention Ross Rowland, that hand kind of guides itself to multiple huge events in preservation history. And I think it's important to sit and talk about, but more importantly, to share the knowledge, get the sources out there and talk about this stuff. Now, I'm in the cab of AFT1, and obviously it is, well, you don't know that, but it is a balmy, probably 30-something degrees out here. So let's go inside the shop and talk about those sources. Ooh, wow. It is really cold in that cab, and that is not the place to be doing book reviews and talking about this stuff. Now we're inside the nice warm shop, so I'll preface this with the phrase I use in a lot of my videos where I give out book recommendations. So what I'll tell you is these books are hard to find, but please buy your books, don't steal them. And if you borrow them from somebody, return them. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about how did we get to this point with Ross Rowland's chronology here. Well, so it's the 1950s, and steam is beginning its exodus, and the diesel electrics are coming into almost profound certainty, right, in terms of longevity. They're going to be here for a while. This is the new motive power. But the public still had a pretty good love affair with steam. Steam had been the source of motive power for trains that they had seen out there on the high iron for decades, absolute decades, And so this is where we get to Ross Rowland capitalizing on this. He looks at this situation and says, okay, well, steam's dying out there. What can I do to kind of bring this back? He has a passion for steam. So he begins the High Iron Company in 1966. So what's in the name, if you will? Well, high iron is the term that they used for so if you have a 4-track main line, the center 2 tracks are for the fastest trains, and they're at the highest level of grade. And if you will, the outer 2 tracks are typically where they would run slower, freights and drags and things like that. So slower trains are on the outside, and on the high iron, or the highest really iron, and in the center is where you get your fast passenger trains, the limiteds, the expresses, all that good stuff. So that is how Ross Rowland comes up with his name. And so again, he begins it in 1966, and it's based out of New Jersey. And so, but if you want to learn more about this, okay, there are great sources out there, and one of them is Hank Weber. Hank Weber actually worked with Ross Rowland. He was a part of the High Iron Company, along with Ross and many others. And so Hank published a book not too long ago. I want to say this was published either a year ago or 2 years ago, so 25 or 24, somewhere in that general time frame. But he publishes this, and this is a great source of information. Also, I will say that Hank's book is a lot of his own reminiscences. So, it's his perspective of the High Iron Company and his own tales of his interaction with steam. But it has some great photos, black and white and color, from the time period of 1966 to 1973 of the High Iron Company. So this is where the High Iron Company is where we get the Canadian Pacific 462s, and even Strasburg's number 90 did a little bit of double heading with the High Iron Company, and the Reading 2102 was also a part of that. There were multiple engines, and obviously everybody's favorite nickel plate 759. So that's a great book. I highly recommend that. And again, that's a fairly recent book, so you should be able to find that out there on the interwebs, or buy it from Hank directly. I would also say, so during this time period of 66 to 73 is where we get Ross's big excursion with the High Iron Company, which is the Golden Spike Centennial Limited. And again, that's to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike out there in Promontory Summit, Utah. And so Ross Rowland puts together a whole consist out there and takes this train out there. Now, he uses 759, the nickel plate, Berkshire, to take it out as far west as, I believe, Kansas City, if I'm not mistaken. And then the Union Pacific took it over from there to get it out to the fanfare and the grounds where they were going to do all these ceremonious things for the centennial. So, but they also made a book. The High Iron Company made a book for this. And if you can find this, I would really recommend, this is published in '69, and it is really good in the fact that it gives you a time frame. So it tells you where they stopped, what was going on at that stop, what engine was on the head end. Just phenomenal stuff, all black and white photos, but just really well done. And if you can find this, I would get out there and look for it. This is just simply called the High Iron Company, the Golden Spike Centennial Limited. So again, really good stuff. If you can find this, get out there and look for this. You're probably going to pay, I won't sugarcoat this one, you're probably going to pay a little bit for everything here because a lot of this stuff is not published anymore. It's out of print. So if you're really, a good way to find out about source, looking for this stuff is to read newsletters from companies. And the High Iron Company was no stranger to that. They kept people engaged through their own newsletters, these little magazines here. They only published 3 of them from what I can surmise, but there's a 1971, there's a 72, and there's a 1973, the farewell to the nickel plate Berkshires in this. And I would, all these were by Howard Pincus, had a role in these. Yeah, edited by Howard Pincus. These are really good sources. Ross writes a little letter in the beginning of each of them to kind of tell you about what's going on, and then there's multiple articles about what's happening in the company. So very well done newsletter. You can find those, wherever it is you find your railroad stuff, eBay, railroad shows, fairs, etc. And so anyway, so the High Iron Company ends in 1973, and this is where we get the genesis of Ross's. The biggest thing he's known for is the American Freedom Train, and so to get to the American Freedom Train, you need something to kind of go out and scout, and that's the Preamble Express. That's in 1974. But 1975 and 1976 is the American Freedom Train running all over the continental United States. And so what we get here is a multitude of sources. So this is where we get Reading 2101, right? Rescued from Ed Striegel's scrapyard in Baltimore, right here, Baltimore. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend. Now, I'm only going to talk about 2101 because we have it here at the museum. Now, there are sources for the Daylight 4449, the Southern Pacific engine. I didn't bring those with me, but they're out there, and there's plenty of information about that engine. So look for those as well. But if you really want to learn more about the American Freedom Train, let's start off with they published a book as well after the fact. So this would have been done after this because the photos in here are from 75 and 76. So it's called All Aboard America. And this is phenomenal because this also has not only color photos, but it has black and whites and multiple stops and are shown here. There's the exchanging of the flags between Doyle McCormick and Ross Rowland. Just really, really good stuff here. And each car has a little color montage to a little photo from each one to kind of show you what was in each. So I recommend this one. This is very well done. Again, this is done by the American Freedom Train Foundation, and this is not published anymore, so you're going to have to go scrounging for this guy. On that note, so the American Freedom Train had put out the commemorative brochure. The one I particularly have in my collection also has the tickets that they were given to get on board and walk through the cars. And these are out there too. You can find the tickets if that's your thing. But if you want the program, they made, hopefully I get this right, I think there's 3 versions of it, if I'm not mistaken. There's 3 versions of the program. This is the last version of it, the 76 version. So this is a cumulative one. This kind of has photos from the whole shebang, if you will. Again, talks about the cars as well. This goes into fairly good depth about what was in each car that the train pulled. So great photos too, and this will really give you some good information. And funny enough, the list of sponsors is on the back, so if you want to get nerdy about that, that's in there as well. So the American Freedom Train ends in 76, but Ross's story is not over. He takes 2101 and he uses it for the Chessie Steam Special, and that is the big celebration. It's basically the B&O's birthday, and this is where we get the Chessie Steam Special. So it's painted up, 2101 is, as the Chessie Steam Special locomotive here in the Chessie colors of that time. The yellow, the vermilion, and the dark blue. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about that, there's great stuff out there. Like this is the Welcome Aboard program that they did for it. So if you were to buy a ticket and get on board and ride this, you would have this, and this is great because it gives you the mile markers and it tells you where they stopped and if there's anything significant at each stop, and gives you information about 2101 itself, and talks about sponsors on the back, and there's some really good stuff in here. It lines out, you can see where the route is. And so, this is just the Welcome Aboard program. Before I forget, on that note, there are a plethora of programs. The Jim Thorpe Flyer was one that pops into my brain, or the New York State Express that were under the High Iron Company. And those are ones you can search out for yourself too. Just about everything that Rowland did in terms of a train, there is some kind of program, a guide for that. And so if you can get out there and look for those, whether it's the High Iron Company, the American Freedom Train Foundation, or the Steam Locomotive Corporation of America, which we'll get to in a minute, you can find those out there. And so I would recommend buying those if you can get a hold of those too. Those are great. And they give you really good information about what the motive power was, the cars that were used, where they were going, the events that were going to unfold. So coming back to 2101, this is where she goes into the shops. And they end up, this needed a monumentous overhaul. So Stephen Hart is the gentleman that wrote this. Very well done, black and white photos. But this was as it went into the shops in Reading, PA, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay, so yes, it was the Reading, PA shop. Sorry, had to look that up in real time. So this is called Revival of the 2101. And again, Stephen Hart is the author of this, and he worked on the Chessie Steam Special. He was a member of the crew, and he has great black and white photos, as I mentioned in here. And this really goes through and just shows you the amount of work. The neat part is the particular one that I bought also had some great articles cut out from it too, and these are great sources as well for you if you're we'll get into primary and secondary sources at the very end of this this section here, but newspaper articles and magazine articles from the time frame are great sources of information. And so that's what mine came with, and mine even has the a couple of articles about when it burned and 2101 caught fire in the Spring Grove, Kentucky roundhouse. But again, this focuses on the revitalization and the overhaul of 2101 when it went to the Reading shop. So can't recommend this enough. This is hard to find. Again, you're probably going to spend a pretty penny if you want this. So as we said, 2101 catches fire in the Spring Grove, Kentucky roundhouse in 1979. And then so it's cosmetically restored and then sent to the B&O Railroad Museum in a trade where Ross Rowland trades for C&O 614, the J3A Greenbrier locomotive that he runs on multiple excursions. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about that, a great book that I found for talking about that is this guy here, Chesapeake and Ohio Greenbrier Type 484 locomotives. This is by Douglas B. Nichols and one of my favorite authors, Thomas W. Dixon Jr. Thomas is he was the founder of the C&O Historical Society down there in Clifton Forge, Virginia. And he does a great job, great author, great historian, really knows his stuff. And I would highly recommend this. There is a chapter in here just about, it's called The Resurrection of 614. So this talks about the various excursions, bringing it back to life, things like that. It talks about the Chessie Safety Express that they ran out there. It also talks about the ACE 3000 project and the when 614 became 614T and it ran as a test module for the ACE 3000. And another source, and I didn't bring it with me today, but I'll flash it up on the screen for you, is David Wardell's book called Red Devil and Other Tales from the Age of Steam. And if you don't know anything about David Wardell, he was a prolific mechanical engineer that loved steam, and he was a underling, if you will, of Livio Dante Porta, and Porta was also conversely, was a subject, if you will. He was a underling of André Chapelon, the Frenchman who kind of gets all this started, right? Chapelon's thing was, we're trying to get the most out of steam. How do we do that? Well, we use science and thermodynamics and the laws of physics. And so that, Chapelon starts up here. That translates into Livio Dante Porta, kind of studying Chapelon stuff and then doing his thing. And then Wardell studies both of those guys. And so Wardell is famously known for the South African Railways Class 26 484, known as the Red Devil. But Wardell also worked with Ross Rowland on the ACE 3000 project. And that's hooking up all of these sensors and all this stuff to 614 as it goes through and pulls these heavy coal drags through the New River Gorge. So they're trying to get all this information in for this new steam locomotive, because there's an oil crisis going on at the time in the US, and they figure, well, maybe this is a good time to try to bring back steam. So what I'll also say is there's a great, get out there, like I mentioned, magazines. Look for stuff like this, okay? Rail Fan and Railroad is one that's still around right now. This one has a great article, if you see down the bottom, about the ACE 3000. I can't recommend this enough. Good stuff in here. And there's other stuff too. So going back to 2101, you can find stuff like this, the Passenger Train Journal out there. Go out and look for this stuff. It is all over websites and eBay and railroad fan fairs and memorabilia shows and whatever. This stuff's out there, and this is really good information, especially if it's published during the time frame that the locomotive ran, especially if they interviewed Ross himself personally. So that's the last time that, so 614 is the last time that Ross really runs out there on the high iron. And so we mentioned, I was going to talk to you about primary versus secondary sources. And what's the difference? Well, in a primary source, you have somebody that has witnessed the event firsthand. Those peepers saw what was going on. So that could be anything from a reporter or a newspaper person that is watching the event unfold, and then they write about it in the, they submit it to their editor, and then it becomes a magazine article or a newspaper article. That's a primary source. Somebody that writes a memoir or a book about their remembrances of an event is also considered a primary source. So, something from that time frame talking about that event is a primary source. Now, if somebody, let's hypothetically pick something out here. Let's say you read a book, and let's say you want to learn about World War II, right? Or let's go D-Day. That's easy to pick out. So 1944. If you read a book that was published in 2024, that's a secondary source. That's somebody that has gone and looked at primary sources, hopefully, and wrote something, their interpretation of it, history-wise, as a secondary source. So things that are not written during the time frame after the fact by somebody that was not there is a secondary source. And those can serve a purpose too. If you just want a nice broad overview of something, you don't want a lot of nitty-gritty details, secondary sources are a great place to go. So again, this is the stuff that's in my collection, and I think this really can help somebody if you really want to get out there and learn more about Ross Rowland and all of his projects, especially, like I said, as AFT1 has come back to life cosmetically. This is going to kind of give us a boom, if you will, in terms of the interest level as to what Ross did. And sadly, he passed away last year in 2025. So hopefully you get out there and you kind of honor his memory by looking over the stuff that he did, and especially the stuff that he accomplished in on the high iron, but in this case in print. Maybe you're not that big of a reader, or perhaps you've already read through the sources I just showed you, or perhaps you found your own. Fantastic, that's awesome. What is even better than reading about this stuff is seeing it. Now, yes, we're not going to see 2101 pulling the American Freedom Train Consist or the Chessie Steam Special anymore, nor are we going to see 614 pulling the Chessie Safety Express. Now, we are going to see 614, right, as all the rail fans out there know. It is coming back. It's at Strasbourg, and that's a different topic. I don't get into that. But if you want to see this stuff in the historical time frame in which it existed, here's some great video options. These are ones I thought were fantastic. That's why they're in my collection. And I really think, now there are others out there, but I think you can't go wrong with at least this as like we'll call it a baseline. Again, if you want to know and watch the magic that Ross Rowland brought to the high iron stage, we'll call it. So let's start off with Sunday River Productions Never Disappoints. 2101 Stomping on Sand Patch. This is great. This really goes into some good history about 2101 as AFT1. And then it's very short though, very, very small. And then it segues into the Chessie Steam Special, and that's the rest of the video. But it's got some really great shots, really, really phenomenal of it, you know, going up over the named sand patch grade and, you know, fighting the Alleghenies. The 2101 story is by Greg Scholl Productions. They never disappoint. I have others from them in the collection. They are really, really good. And it's great history too. Whoever's narrating this, and I'm forgetting off the top of my head, whoever narrates these videos does a phenomenal job. And this also talks about 2101 all throughout its history. It's the entire lifespan of it, obviously, as the name implies, the 2101 story. So it goes through Reading, it goes through AFT1, and then it talks about the Chessie Steam Special, and then it ends with it coming into the museum. So that's cool, right? 2101 is your thing. I highly recommend these two. If 614, big C&O J3A classes are your thing, or you just want to see some really great action of big steam, cannot recommend these three enough. And there are others out there, and we'll talk about those in a second. So again, these two Sunday River Productions are really great. Thunder on Cranberry is great in terms of watching it going over the Alleghenies. If that's your thing, this is what you want to watch. It's short. I think it's 30 or 40 minutes, but it's still really good footage. Thunder in the Alleghenies is my personal favorite. And that's because it has this iconic shot of, you're up on Hawk's Nest, you know, looking down over the New River Gorge, and you watch 614 snake along there, and I believe it's Steve Wickersham that is the engineer on this one. And it's just this, it's just a work of art. Whoever shot that sequence just really did a great job, captured some really good footage. So highly recommend that one. And one that I personally like to watch, especially on a, well, if it's a cold winter day, you probably don't want to watch this. Otherwise, turn your heat up. Maybe during a summer day. The C&O 614 Chessie Safety Express Winter Cold Trains. I swear to God, I had to put a blanket on after watching this guy. It's just the dead of winter, and it's nothing but snow, and you're watching 614 just battle it out. I think, for me, that's from Mark 1 video. I thought that was a really good introduction into 614. And being able to watch it. And they also talk about the Ace 3000 years of that thing. So if you're into that and you kind of want to watch the testing that was going on and pulling the huge coal drags in order to get data, you know, for Ross's hopeful steam locomotive of the 21st century, this is your guy. I would also probably recommend from Mark 1, I don't have this in my collection, I know, shame on me, right, Trevor? Is the Mark 1 video about Ross Rowland. It's very well done. You know, it doesn't really get into his time at the New Hope in Ivyland, but hopefully you got to see him up there, you know, during the December month. I would also highly recommend that you look for the one, and I don't remember who does it off the top of my head, but it's when 614 did the runs on the New Jersey Transit. That is pretty epic as well. Again, buy these wherever you can buy them, but please do buy them. And again, YouTube is out there too. I don't hate on YouTube. Obviously, I'm on YouTube. But, you know, it's always good to support small businesses, local businesses, wherever it is you can find these. And, you know, help those people out too. Model train shows, model train stores, any of those places will most likely have these. And if not, ask them. Maybe they can order them for you. Well, that was a ton of fun. I really hope you got a lot out of the sources that are out there. And my collection is certainly not the only one. There are so many more resources out there. Get out there and look for this stuff. It is all over the place. If you're looking in the right places, that is. And, you know, there are primary sources in this case. That would be people that were actually there. Those are good ones to sort out if you can find them. And what I think is absolutely fascinating about the history of this is it kind of stems from one man, Ross Rowland. And it touched so many other people's lives. People like Lou R. Curry or Steve Wickersham or all these people that came together. Ross brought all these people together, and multiple other people too. Ross was, as I've said in previous videos, he was a larger-than-life figure in a good way. He was just a showman of things. He was able to, through his passion for steam and the showmanship, combine those two things together, and you get the Golden Spike Limited, you get the American Freedom Train, the Chesty Steam Special, blah, 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 blah. This is what you get. You get class, just grade A, class 1, really good steam hauled excursions. So, again, get out there, search for this stuff. And again, as I've said in all the videos, I'm not here to promote where you buy this stuff, but just buy it. Don't steal it. And this can be something that you'll learn from, and hopefully you pass it on, the knowledge, to other people. That's what history is about. Continually passing on the facts, the figures, and weaving them into a story. So this is Trevor from History on the Move. Again, sure hope you enjoyed this one. This was a treasure for me to be able to share. Some of my passion about this, about Ross Rowland and what it is that he did, and finding more about this stuff and collecting it as well. So get out there, read history, explore history, and most importantly, you make your own history. I'll see you on the next one.